Yeah, so we are almost there. We are live now on the YouTube. We will begin in a minute. So take deep breath and then just a minute. Okay, shall we?
Yeah,
Are you all ready?
we're all ready.
Good, thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to HLF Online and on my own behalf and on behalf of the entire team HLF. And on your behalf, I welcome our two guests this evening, the two lovely authors of two fabulous books that have come out recently, Savie Karnel and Sharanya Manivannan. And ladies and gentlemen, the two authors that will be in conversation this evening, they have come out with two wonderful books for children. And although they are not necessarily children's authors, these two books are for children, particularly Sharanya. More and more about that a little later. But thank you very much, Sharanya and Savie, for joining us this evening. And as I said, on my own behalf and on behalf of the entire team HLF, I welcome you both to the HLF session.
It's a pleasure to
Thank
be
you. Lovely to be on your at HLF.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us over.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, just a quick word about the authors and the two books. I'll try and show you the covers of these two wonderful books. But those of you who have not had the time to go through the email that I have sent, which contains both a quick summary of the two books as well as a bio of the two authors. Savie Karnel is a journalist, or used to be a journalist, and now she has come out with her first book, The Nameless God. And The Nameless God, ladies and gentlemen, is a wonderful story of two young boys, 10-year-old boys, Noor and Amitabh Bachchu. Don't get that wrong. It's not Amitabh Bachchan, it's Amitabh Bachchu. So these two boys, like all normal boys, want holidays for their schools, and they pray for good marks. And then they realize that their respective gods, Ganesh and Fakir Baba, are probably too busy attending to the too many requests of too many children. So they come out with a brilliant idea that why don't they have their own god who knows only them, and therefore he would have no choice but to grant all their wishes. So they, of course, do come up with a wonderful god, a god that they make. And this god, lo and behold, actually works a miracle the very next day. And so therefore they realize that they have hit upon a wonderful idea. But then, of course, they get caught in much larger turmoil, not of their own making. And then they appeal to their God, and then they realize that there are many things which are beyond their control. And so they get caught in that communal conflict post 1992, the Babri Masjid incident. And these two boys get caught in that, and then the story goes on. And we will talk more about that during the conversation. So that's a wonderful novel that Savie Karnel has come out. Congratulations, Savie, on your debut as a writer. And in a way, Sharanya is also making a debut, not as a writer, but as an illustrator, because Sharanya already has about half a dozen books. She's a poet, she's a novelist, and she has also now come out with this wonderful book for children. And she's on to another project where she's going to write a graphic novel for the grown-ups. And so Sharanya is, in that sense, a more established writer with about half a dozen books to her credit. But this book is special because Sharanya is making her debut as an illustrator. And what is this book about? In a word, it is a conversation between a mother and a daughter. And they are talking about mermaids and many other things. And the conversation takes place on a beautiful moonlit night in a lagoon. And so many things come up, and we will talk about some of these things during our conversation. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a brief introduction to both the authors as well as the two books. And let us see if we can show the books to our audience. This is Savie's book, The Nameless God. As you can see, this is a book of friendship between two boys, two 10-year-olds, Noor and Amitabh Bachchu. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is Sharanya's book, a wonderfully produced silver blue book, Mermaids in the Moonlight. So congratulations, Savie and Sharanya, once again. And let's begin the conversation this evening. I'll begin with Sharanya, if you don't mind. I'll begin with you. Sharanya, you have written about mermaids earlier, and you have written this book for children, and you are writing another book for the grown-ups as a graphic novel. So let me begin with the obvious question. What is this fascination with the mermaids, and what is the backstory?
Thank you for having me here, Professor. And it's such a pleasure to share this space, this virtual space with Savie, who is across the country, and you and the audience who is anywhere. To come to your question, the backstory about these mermaids is that my family's hometown, Mattakalappu, also known as Batiklo, which is on the eastern coast of Sri Lanka. There is a beautiful phenomenon, mysterious phenomenon that happens there on full moon nights, where if you go into the lagoon and you dip your paddle into the water and hold one end to your ear, you can hear these strange noises from under the water. And all over Batiklo town are these mermaid figurines on public facades, on pillars, on clock towers, I've even seen a mermaid on a gopuram in a temple, everywhere. And there are songs about the mean mugger, but there were no stories that I could find. And this was something that I was really perplexed by and intrigued by. And at some point in my own personal journey as a diasporic Ilangai Tamil person, I sort of let my quest for the mermaids lead me into an understanding of my own culture, the losses that my people have incurred, particularly in the latter half of the 20th century until, to this day, our history, and just so many different things along the way, some of which I've touched on in Mermaids in the Moonlight. But it was really the question of where are the stories? How do you have a mythic figure and not have stories? That's what led me into these works. Mermaids in the Moonlight it will be followed, as you mentioned, by a graphic novel, Incantations Over Water. And I'm about a third of the way into illustrating that right now. So fingers crossed for that.
And when is it likely to come out?
It's scheduled for later this year, but we are in the second year of a difficult pandemic, which has affected everybody in some way. So let's see.
Yeah, you mentioned, for example, you have, apart from using words of endearment for the daughter in the book, you have also used Ilankai and Matakalappu rather than Sri Lanka and Battikalova, the more familiar terms. And particularly for a diasporic child, like the child in the book, those would have been much more familiar names, Battikalova and Sri Lanka, rather than. So my question was it a linguistic choice or was it a political choice to use these Tamil names rather than the more familiar English names?
It was a sentimental choice. It was a political choice, and it was a culturally accurate choice, because the question of who is it familiar to? When I was growing up, my grandparents always said Mattakalappu, and they would say Ceylon. They would not say Sri Lanka, because that is the name that they were familiar with. So, the question of who is it familiar to arises as well. But politically as well, the diaspora is a very, very diverse one. And there are many people who don't even want the English terms at all. So, I wanted to find a way that honored the culture, honored the language, and also honored diversity of opinion. And to me, using the Tamil words was the most intuitive way to do all of these things.
Although I artificially made a distinction between linguistic and political choice, I suppose all linguistic choices are political choices, right? And all naming and renaming are political decisions, right? So that's, thank you very much. And Savie, if I can also begin with a very basic question about your novel. This is a novel about two boys, 10-year-old boys. So my first question was, why boys? Why not two girls?
Well, it wasn't a conscious choice. I mean, maybe somehow when I imagined this story, I had boys in my mind. I really do not know why. So I stuck to it.
I mean, I was wondering whether, because, the adventure story, the stock figure in adventure stories have always been boys, although there are, adventure stories with girls, but very often adventure story as a genre is associated with boys. So I was wondering whether it was a kind of an unconscious.
No, it wasn't. I mean, when I began writing the story, I didn't write it as an adventure story. It turned out to be an adventure story. I began writing it as a means to tell the story of living together. And somehow when I started thinking of the story, I just came up with boys. So, but later on, when you see in the story, when the adventure begins, the person who really drives the adventure is Seema, who is a girl.
Correct. Yeah.
So I guess,
yeah, Seema looked to me.
The adventure is gender neutral.
Let's hope so. But since you talked about beginnings, how the story, when the story came to you, I was wondering whether the story of two boys from two different religious communities and becoming friends, did that story come to you first, or setting it in the 1992, did that come first? I mean, which, or did both of them occur to you simultaneously?
Well, the friendship and the 92 riots, they occurred simultaneously, not the creation of the god. That came much later. So I began thinking about talking of friendships. So this I kind of wrote the first draft around somewhere in 2015. So that's when I started looking around me. I could see changes happening in the society, people being vocal about not being friendly, which is not something that I grew up with. People distinguishing between religious groups. So I started seeing that around me, and that's also the time when my son was born in 2014, and it got me thinking, how am I going to tell a child that what you're looking or what you're listening around you is not the way things should be? And that's a different way of living. I mean, that's the way of living. There's a way in which we all have been living, and most of us are living. So that's how I came up with the story of friendship. And 92 being, I guess, pretty recent, not very old. And like we were children, I was a child when the Babri Masjid demolition and the riots took place. So I had few memories which I could immediately relate to communal violence and disharmony. So all that together, I came up with a story.
Yeah. I suppose for a different generation, probably the 1947 partition would have been the most defining moment in terms of the living together and falling apart.
Right.
And, I suppose for another generation,
very
the
true.
1992, would be the kind of a milestone in terms of the evolution or what should I say, the degeneration of the society. So probably 1992 would definitely be I would say, a convenient takeoff point to set a story about two boys and their friendship. So yeah, 1992 definitely. And in fact, I was, that's something that I found very interesting between these two books. Both books are looking backward into the past. But of course, from two different points of view. You have looked at the past in a more historical sense, whereas Sharanya's book looks into the past in a more from a mythological point of view. And of course, we all know that these are the two ways in which we can look at the past, both in terms of history and in terms of mythology. So my question to you, Sharanya, is that when did this idea that you wanted to write about what you said, the missing stories, when did that actually occur to you? And why did you feel the need or the urge to write about those missing or unspoken stories?
I only got to visit Mattakalappu for the first time in 2012. I was already 27 years old at the time. And, so I noticed the mermaids right away all over town. And I realized that something that my mother had told me when I was a child was real. It was not something she'd concocted because of the Disney film, which came out when I was about 5 or 6, I think. But, that there was a cultural link here. And I wondered whether the fact that I was not able to trace folklore was an indication of cultural erasure. One of many erasures that could have happened during the Civil War. So I kind of went into it with that preconceived expectation. And then I found out very quickly that that was not the case at all. There were different elements to it because while some of what I've written about has now passed into mythology, it was also a part of the fairly recent past. The matrilineal and matrilocal system that was dominant in Mattakalappu lasted easily into the mid 20th century. And I know this for a fact because of some things which I understood in the course of my research about my own great-grandmother, for instance, who was able to walk out of a marriage in around 1929 in this small town. You'd think it would be unthinkable. But it was possible because the society was structured in such a way that she had her own land. She had a different kind of agency. So while this has now passed into myth and legend in a way, it was also recent history. So I didn't want to fill the folkloric void. I wanted to acknowledge it. I wanted to acknowledge that we don't know why stories haven't sprouted around this mythic figure. But there are all these other stories from around the world which we don't even know about because we think of the mermaid as a Eurocentric figure or else as a Disney character. We think that mermaids belong to a certain milieu only, when that's not true. They have existed across cultures. There are stories about them from just about every human inhabited continent. And those stories are what form the bulk of this book. Has that answered your question?
Yeah. And because this also connects to what you said earlier about the erasure of language, the Tamil words in a way being taken over. And then, so in a way, this kind of a recuperation of both language as well as history as well as myth. So I think that's a wonderful, I would say, enterprise to be involved in. But to me, what really struck me as a very powerful metaphor was the very, act of listening. And particularly listening to submerged voices. That to me was an extremely powerful metaphor, which could actually, connote many things. How did you come up with this idea of listening to voices which were either submerged or drowned? So tell us a little bit more about that.
Firstly, thank you, Professor, for seeing that in my work. It's not an idea that I came up with. I think it's just good practice for all of us, no matter what we do. And I think there's a similarity there with Savie's book as well. In order to coexist with one another, we have to be willing to listen and not only to speak. And that's for everybody, absolutely everybody. From a storytelling or creative perspective, I think it's good practice. It's a beautiful thing to be open to learning, to be curious, to wait for the answers when you ask the question.
Because I was also thinking of how intergenerational listening is so important. So and Savie, since Sharanya mentioned this aspect of listening as an important ingredient, if I can say, for peaceful coexistence, as it were, right? You bring in, for example, many subtle indications of difference and how those differences are actually accommodated and respected in each other's culture. For instance, you bring in food, you bring in, Noor's biryani and the various food things that are made in Bachu's house. So, what is your take on this? Cultural differences and how those differences are very much part of our lives, and how I think coexistence is all about not merely tolerating, but actually respecting each other's differences.
Yes. And I guess food clothing, they all form an important part of not just the individual, but a society as a whole. I guess, and the best part of our society is that we have been open to differences, and we have been living together, respecting it. And I guess that holds and that forms an important aspect, because there's one line in the book as well, wherein Seema also Noor says that India is like a rainbow. You cannot erase the other colors and keep just one color. Yeah. Then it will lose its essence altogether. Well, I guess, again, our country is not just a map drawn on a piece of paper. It consists of I would say it's a colorful collage of people of different faiths, different beliefs, different cultures, different foods, different traditions living together. You take out these differences and make them one, and it will no longer be India. It will, I think, will turn on something else.
Yeah. Yeah, but I was
they
thinking,
are very important.
Yeah, sorry. I was thinking, Savie,
Yes,
that does sometimes, do you think these very big concepts, do they sound out of place in the mouths of 10-year-olds? For instance, when you make them talk about constitution, secularism, class difference, and so did you ever feel that some of these concepts are out of character in terms of the age of the two protagonists?
Not completely. Because there are children who do think a lot about these things, who do think a little beyond the age. Because these days I've seen children speak about how could I put it? Put it very subtly. Speak about a different community badly in a wild tone. So, and that was quite hurtful.
Yeah.
I mean, I cannot expect, I'm listening that from 10-year-olds. So where is it coming from? So again, if at all they can speak something negative, I'm sure they can speak positives too.
Yeah.
So these days, though we older people think that they do not understand some concepts, but I guess we are wrong, because they are open to media and there's an overflow of information. Besides what they overhear from parents, they do read, they do have mobile phones, and as we know, WhatsApp University is more powerful than anything else now. So I guess children do think, and with my characters, I take them as critical thinkers who try to question and who like to question.
Yeah, in fact, that's
how I see it.
Yeah, that's what I had in mind when I asked you why boys, because I was wondering whether you thought, boys would be more exposed to and more vulnerable to this kind of misinformation and this kind of indoctrination, relatively compared to girls. I was wondering whether that was, at the back of your mind for choosing boys as the two protagonists.
No, I didn't have that in mind.
Yeah.
Like, I guess me, while growing up as a girl, I guess I was exposed to information and exposed as much as a boy.
Correct. Yeah.
So I do not have this distinction in my mind.
Yeah, Sharanya, if I can, something
they just happen to be boys.
Yeah, something that Savie also mentioned, how no concept or no idea is too big even for children, and I particularly in your book, I found this what should I say, the mother handing over in a way the inheritance of loss, right, to the daughter. That to me was a very interesting trope in the book. The mother in a way handing over the inheritance of these stories, of these unheard stories, voices to the daughter, and the daughter becoming the inheritor of those voices. Extremely powerful. What should I say? The entire. You mentioned the matrilineal and matrilocal societies, and I thought that was a wonderful way in which, in a way, you are reversing the usual transfer of father to daughter, father to son, idea, right? So this idea, was it something that came when you were thinking about the matrilineal society, or how did that happen? That the conversation is between a mother and daughter, and the entire transference is taking place between them.
I absolutely envision this book as, the bequeathal of an inheritance, exactly as you said. An inheritance of loss, as you said, an inheritance of stories, and inheritance of possibilities as well. I think it was a little more subconscious than that, because what had happened is I had always thought that I will create a graphic novel, and having drawn so many pages, I will extract from it and create a children's book. That was the concept which I had gone along with for a few years into my research in the region, as well as on mermaids around the world in general. But Mermaids in the Moonlight completely surprised me. And, one day I just knew, like the story just came to me, the storyline, that this was a mother and a daughter who were experiencing the singing fish or the meen makhar for the very first time together. And then I knew that this book was its own entity and demanded its own attention, its own color palette, its own everything, that it was not going to be a spin-off at all. Although there is a little bit of overlap between the graphic novel and this, but really very, very little. So it was subconscious. I think, what had been in my head and in my heart for a few years just came together in a very organic fashion.
Yeah, I'll come to the illustrations part a little later, but I wanted to ask you, see, there are three major characters, if I may say that, in the book. The mother, who is in a way the conveyor of the stories, the daughter, who is the receiver of the stories, and Ila, the mermaid, the source of the stories, right? So as a writer, with whom do you actually identify yourself? The source, the conveyor, or the receiver of stories?
I realized as I was working on this book that I am all the characters, like they say in dream theory, everyone you see in a dream is you. I'm all three of them. I am the mother who is giving the inheritance. I am the cherished child who is receiving the inheritance. I am the mysterious mermaid. And Ila is actually the narrator of the graphic novel. That's the overlap. So even though in this book she's an imaginary figure, Amma and Nilavali come up with her, name her themselves. In the graphic novel, there is a mermaid named Ila who speaks to the reader, as it was. So, in this case, this is a deeply, deeply personal book for, I think, obvious and not obvious reasons. But I will say that I am all three of those characters for sure.
I was asking that question also because of your background and your movement from Sri Lanka to Malaysia, now to India. So in a way, you are that like the child in the or the mother who is moving from place to place, living always as somebody who is an outsider. Yeah. At least Ila there, belongs to the lagoon.
Yes, Ela belongs to the lagoon and the lagoon belongs to her.
Yeah.
But she has her own kind of loneliness.
Yes. Because I think her stories have all been forgotten. I mean, what is the point of a story if nobody knows about it?
Well, that's a bit like the question of if a tree falls in a forest, right?
Yeah.
I love the idea that perhaps there are mermaids. There have always been mermaids somewhere along, the evolutionary trajectory, but they exist outside of the realm of our science or our curiosity. They don't exist for us. I love that idea.
Yeah. And in the book also, you mentioned that there could be different ways of understanding the sound or the music of the lagoon. There could be a scientific explanation. There could be a imaginary reconstruction of that. So, is the idea that there are multiple ways of looking at the same thing? I mean, is that the whole idea?
That's definitely one of the themes that I wanted to center in the book. Multiplicity of narrative. And that's not just in terms of multiplicity of opinion, but genuine diversity. Which is why there's a story from a Southeast Asian Ramakien, which does not exist in Indian Ramayanas. And of course, I say Ramayanas, plural.
Yeah.
And similarly with most of the stories that I've used in this book, I found them as a person who reads primarily in English. So I would have found work that was in translation, that would have been passed down through different, different people who recorded it in their own ways, with their own biases, the limitations of translation, all of these things. So they come to me, and then they come to the reader in a kind of palimpsest fashion. So the certainty that there is only a true story is something which really limits us as human beings and limits the way we live, which again connects back to what Savie has been writing about and talking about. So yeah, absolutely, multiplicity and diversity and honoring both of these things were important themes in this book.
Yeah, I'll come to the different stories that you mentioned of the Ramayana. But Savie, in your book, you alternate the chapters, between Noor and Amita or Bachchu, right? Is that a kind of a structurally one way of saying that there are two different viewpoints, and there could be many more?
Yeah. I mean, I have consciously done that because I wanted to bring the viewpoints of both the boys. Just as you said, just to show that there could be different viewpoints. Both Noor and Bachchu are living at the same time, are in the same situation, and they both have different perspectives. And they bring their family's perspective to the story as well. Like when Noor talks about the same riots or the demolition, his family has a different perspective, and same Bachchu's family has a different perspective. And so I wanted to bring this multiple viewpoints through alternating the chapters and the voices.
Yeah.
So
Since
that
you
was what
mentioned times, Savie, you located the entire story in the 90s, early 90s, actually in 92.
Yes.
So, there are many period details, film songs, and the gadgets, Walkman you mentioned, right? And the social factors like the Gulf money coming in big time.
Right.
So, I was trying to actually find, somewhere that you slipped, but I actually haven't found anything.
Oh, thank God. For a moment, I know.
No, except one which I wanted to check with you. Noor says that when he grows up, he wants to be one of the Khan, Bollywood Khans.
Yes.
So I was wondering, of course, all three Khans made their debuts in the late 80s and early 90s. But were they really a phenomenon by the 90s, by the early 90s, that somebody like Noor would have wanted to?
Because I guess so, because as like those, because even from the 90s, what I remember are those Maine Pyar Kiya songs and Qayamat Se Qayamat Tak. As a child, I remember those seeing in the movie hall. So I guess they would have made an impression or a mind like Noor's.
No, that was really a very small point. The point that I was trying to ask you was, did you rely entirely on your own memory of those times, or did you constantly do the kind of background research to fact check those details?
I did.
Yeah,
I did. I mean, I did research and went back and tried to check the years.
Yeah.
And I did do the checking part, the dates and all that.
So did you first put the things in the story first and then check, or did you check and then put the things in the?
I don't really recall, because this thing what I wrote was about 6 years ago. But I did check. I can assure you, I did check. But I think I put them in the story first, I guess.
Yeah. And because you got almost everything right, whether the television programs, the Ramayana being such a big hit, and then the snatches of the songs that you mentioned, all really were part of that period. And in a similar way, Sharanya, I wanted to ask you, how much of research was involved in? Of course, you said it was a sentimental, undertaking. But obviously, there's much more to that than merely sentiment, right? So, how much of research went into this, and how much of it did you have to leave out, before you put this together?
Thank you for that question. And firstly, I wanted to say to Savie, my previous book before this was also historical fiction set in the 9th century, and I made some mistakes. It's okay.
Yeah,
it happens. That's why we write fiction and are not academics like the professor here. So like Savie, research was very, very important to me. In fact, it's one of my favorite parts of the writing process. Every book that I do, I conduct as much research as I can, both prior as well as during. Reading forms a big part of that, for sure. In this case, I took a few trips to Batticaloa to spend time there and also to speak directly with people who live there. And these people would be anyone, really, from my own extended family to fisher people to writers and academics to even random people whom I got into conversations with, because I really wanted to know whether or not there were stories and, if they'd been erased or if they were hidden from me. And I love that you asked me what I had to leave out. I was able to hint at many things in this book, which I will only be able to really delve into, not even in the graphic novel, but in other works that I'm writing. I've been writing a novel set in Batticaloa for a long time, and that's also historical fiction over a 90-year period. There are a lot of cultural elements which I will only be able to bring into my work in future books. I'll give you an example of that. The simple answer to how do you have a mythic figure, this intriguing symbol, and not have stories about her, is that if you live in such a magical place where unusual and mysterious things happen all the time, on top of which your people have seen decades and decades of strife, and your own reality is so brutal that the mind and the heart have to cope with unthinkable things, unspeakable things that have happened to your loved ones. It's not a stretch of the imagination for there to be a mermaid in the lagoon who sings every full moon night. There was a very elderly writer whom I had a conversation with, and I was asking him about the mermaids, and he was not interested in the mermaids at all. He wanted to tell me about how, in a slightly chauvinistic way, he wanted to say that Tamil civilization was so advanced. He said Tamil civilization was so advanced that we had robots way before Western science. And he told me about how, in Batticaloa, his own grandfather or great-grandfather had kept a zombie child in his home in some kind of vegetable. And this corpse could be animated to go out and kill people. And to me, that is something from the supernatural realm, a zombie. To him, it was evidence of how we were scientifically advanced centuries ago. So it's all a matter of perception. So there was the angle that I was coming at as a feminist with liberal values from the diaspora. There was the angle he was coming at as a more conservative person with, who was still kind of lodged in that colonial, post-colonial understanding of the world, where there's a need to prove that we are this, we are that, we are glorious. And our perspective on essentially the same thing. What I saw as supernatural, he saw as scientific. So these were some of the things which I'm going to continue to explore, for as long as I am able to create.
Yeah. And since you mentioned the different versions of the Ramayana earlier, and also now the different perspectives, where did you find this strange story of, the daughter of Ravana, right, Suvarnamacha, falling in love with Hanuman? And then, although you don't mention it, after reading that, I went back and looked up. And by the time Hanuman leaves, they actually have a child.
Yes.
So, where did you come across this? And given the mainstream understanding of Hanuman as the celibate god, as the brahmachari and the eternal brahmachari and so on. So did you feel that there's a point of making this other versions of not just this story, but every story has many versions, right? So how did you come across some of these interesting versions of not just the Ramayana, but different mythological mermaids?
The thing is this, every story in my book is recorded somewhere. And if one has the curiosity, one can find it. And I really think that a lack of curiosity is one of the things that ails us as a society. these days, that we aren't open to the idea that there could be anything beyond our own noses, really. So the story of Suvarna Macha comes from Southeast Asia. She is present in the Thai Ramakien. And as you said, she and Hanuman do have a child. He also has a child with the Makara. So he has at least 2 children with sea creatures, sea beings, as it were. And I chose not to put that into this book because this is for children. I thought I would keep it light and not get too heavy. That's explored in more detail in the graphic novel. I feel like I missed a part of your question.
No, yeah. In fact, I wanted to I was asking, where did these, did some story suddenly land up, in your lap, or was every story you went after?
I think if you put yourself on that path, some people land up anyway.
Yeah.
And it will seem magical. It will seem like an amazing synchronicity, and maybe it is, but that's only because you are in alignment. And so
you are listening. Basically, you are listening.
Absolutely, you're listening.
Yeah.
And
you something that you mentioned about illustrations. What I really found interesting in the illustrations, and I wanted to check with you, also because I know that you are a poet. Usually to poets, very often many poets say that the image comes first and then the words follow, and so on and so forth. And here you are writing a story and illustrating it yourself. And what I really found interesting with the illustrations is that the illustrations are not just appendages. They don't just illustrate the written word, but they actually have a story of their own, right? Even without the words, the illustrations tell a story of their own. And very often, the illustrations tell a story which is beyond what the words are narrating, right? I can give you examples from the story where the words don't say anything, but the illustrations say much more than what the words are saying. So, please tell us the kind of an interface between the words on the page and the illustrations. Sharanya, the writer, and Sharanya, the illustrator.
Thank you for that. I'm really happy to know that you felt that way about the illustrations as being storytelling elements in and of themselves. I wrote the manuscript first and then began to illustrate it, for the simple reason that words are easier to edit than illustration. So it was practical. But I did spend time thinking about how to evoke certain things. One straightforward example is that the Civil War is very lightly spoken of. Amma just says there has been a lot of sorrow in this place. But the accompanying illustration contains several different stories, in fact, that talk about things which had taken place during the war and some elements which continue to be true. I think you're sharing that image, Professor. Yes, that's right. So you've got destruction to property, which is a very neutral thing. You've got a child soldier, which is not a neutral thing. And then you have a mother or a grandmother holding an image of her beloveds who have disappeared. Yeah. So the mothers of the disappeared have been on permanent protest for a few years now in Sri Lanka, seeking the truth. And I would say seeking justice, but justice is an unbearably complex thing, which I don't want to say lightly, but seeking the truth at least. So in this way, I definitely did sometimes use the images to tell a bit more of the story. I also used it in lighthearted ways. For instance, there's a page with in which a mermaid is waiting for her meal along with a cat and a merman, and all of the seafood is being carried away in a net. So that's a humor element that I brought in, which isn't a part of the text, but it's there to play with the text.
Yeah. In fact, there are many illustrations like this double spread, where there is entirely an illustration and just two words, and listen, which I thought an extremely powerful. The economy of words. I thought the illustrations helped you in minimizing the use of words. And what 100 words could have explained, you managed to show it through one illustration. I have, for instance, this wonderful image of the matrilineal society that you mentioned, where you see a series of women holding hands. I think that's very important. The sisterhood, or the sorority, and the togetherness of women, which I thought was extremely well done without actually saying anything. So I think the illustrations really helped in a way in minimizing the verbal part. Did you do it like that? For instance, after doing an illustration, did you say, oh, these words are unnecessary, and then remove some of these words?
Yes. So at the book design stage, I really found out that Sharanya, the illustrator, is the one in control, because there were points where I removed 2 paragraphs at a time, because I said, that doesn't move the storyline. I want the focus to be on the image. So that certainly happened. And I really want to thank you, Professor, for saying such kind things about the illustrations. That really means a lot to me.
Well, it's all there. I'm not making it up. I'm as I said, I'm also listening, right? And I think it all depends on what the pictures convey. All depends on how open you are to receive them. Just as if you are willing to listen, there are stories all around, including the submerged stories, of the mermaids. And that's exactly what I think Savie also was trying to show, that 1992 is not just a history that is over and done with, right? Savie, if I can come back to you and ask you, for instance, you show in the book that by and large, a majority of the people, are still in a way away from indoctrination. They are not yet completely brainwashed. But one character, probably someday you might want to expand that into a another story, is of people who innocently become part of this whole machinery. For instance, there is this slightly older boy, Sanju, right? Who doesn't know that his innocent actions will actually, become this kind of a communal cauldron. And then he realizes that, and even, how even ordinary, unknowingly citizens become, in a way, participants in this madness. By they think that, okay, I'm just giving a small donation for a brick, right? Or I'm just contributing a packed lunch to the car savers. But in a way, they're all becoming part of this larger diabolic plan. So I thought the characters like Sanju, who get drawn into it and then realize what a horrible thing that they have become part of, and this innocent citizens who unknowingly are drawn into it become participants in this. I thought that's although they are not the major characters, I thought that there is a story of how we all get sucked into this madness.
Thank you, Professor, for bringing it up, because many people miss out on Sanju. He's such a minor character, but you see through him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I guess most of us get embroiled into this unknowingly.
Yeah.
Because I guess most of these violent party propaganda is packaged in a different way. It is packaged as maybe mere helping or mere upholding of your values or upholding your family. That is how it is passed on to many people, and they innocently, unknowingly, though they do not mean any harm,
correct,
they do get into the clutches of these communal tensions.
And also, interestingly, many of them do realize, after the break of this communal violence, they realize, and each of them quickly, in a way, try to separate themselves, distance themselves from this.
Yeah, because I guess inherently with most of us is we do not actually mean harm to anyone else. When I guess many of us get involved in it, what we see is just a simple thing. We just see that we are standing up for something we should have stood up for, or to uphold what we have learned from our parents and from our elders, without realizing that could lead to greater harm.
Yeah. We are almost towards, reach the end of our time, but I do have a few questions from the audience. But before I kind of scroll through them, I would like both of you to respond to one common question. Do you, Savie, you wrote about 1992 and how the situation actually brings out the good part of, ordinary citizens. And Savie, you through the use of the mother conveying the stories to the daughter, you also look at the future. So in a way, what I wanted to ask you is that, do you think that there is still hope, there is still optimism, there is still something that we can see, going forward? Is how does it look to you? I mean, are we on the right path? Or, I mean, just your quick response to how do you foresee the future, or where we are? Because 1992 and now, do you think the situation has become better or worse? Or and similarly, Sharanya, would you think that there will be better times, more stories would be listened to, and so on? So how would you look at that?
Savie, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. Well, I say thank you, Sharanya. I just want to say that I see a lot of hope. I mean, I see a lot of hope and a lot of optimism. Well, at one point we may feel that things are going haywire, things are going south, but it is never late to rebuild things. We have seen that in the 90s as well, wherein most people felt that that everything had crumbled, that things were bad, but yet people came together. They did keep aside their differences. They did hold friendship above everything else, and they did come back and they did pick up the pieces and they built a society. So I guess the same thing it is now. Though we may feel that things are going south, but there are many of us, many individuals can make a difference. I guess though the stories of hatred are more, I guess there are many stories of love and friendship which are untold.
Yeah.
And it is those stories that are keeping us going. And they give us hope. And they will continue to bring better times.
Yeah.
That's all.
Good. Sharanya?
I think I would just like to supplement what Savie said by saying there's also an element of effort, which goes, where we begin with that hope, we begin with that optimism. But then what do we do with it? We know that the systems have failed us, the structures have failed us. We can see that clearly all over the world during this pandemic. So what do we as individuals do with our belief that the world can be a better place? What are the steps we take actively in our own small ways and big ways? I think if more of us held a sense of personal accountability and an understanding that we are interconnected, and not just in a everything is harmonious way, but in everything affects everybody kind of way, we can create the change that we hope will happen.
Yeah, I think we cannot write unless there is hope, right? I think as writers, you can only write because you do believe that things would become better. I mean, otherwise, why write? Right?
I think I disagree, but I don't think we have time to get into it.
Okay. Just to quickly scroll through the comment, there have been lots of comments in the chat box from all over the place, from Karnataka, from Tamil Nadu, and so on and so forth. I just wanted to quickly, I'll read instead of choosing some of the comments. Many of them are, of course, congratulating. They say they have enjoyed your books. One of the questions or a comment was that was directed to Savie, actually. Samir Srivastava is asking, at times I felt that though the protagonists were Noor and Bachu, it was Seema and her wisdom who steers the story at a critical point. Therefore, I can call the story a gender-neutral story. That's more of a comment. And then Vijay Shankar also responds to it by saying that it will be naive and impudent to see the picture through the prism of gender. Love or hate do not discriminate. So whether you wanted it to be read specifically as a feminist story or not, some of them would enjoy the story as a story, and others would like to see it. But Seema, to me, was an interesting character, which, although I honestly, I felt that probably you were trying to tick too many boxes by bringing in everything into the story, because you have two boys from two different religions, and then you have Seema, who is an atheist, and she's also an Ambedkarite. The story was, and so Seema, in a way, as you yourself mentioned, actually she steps in at a critical point, and when actually the adventure starts, right? So the reader who thinks that Seema actually turns out to be the heroine, if one were to say that, is quite right. Kokila Krishnan has a question for Sharanya, and she says, is there any specific reason for choosing visual art? Your views on the relation between visual art and writing prose. Your take on that.
Sure. I think we had already discussed the possibilities of interplay. So I think the second part of the question was addressed. As for choosing visual art, I had been drawing and painting for a long time without necessarily, looking at how I could share that work or create something specifically of that nature. And the funny thing is, ever since Mermaids in the Moonlight came out, many people have asked me, when did you decide to do a graphic novel? And I can tell you when, but I can't tell you why. I can't actually trace that back because as I said, illustration has been a part of just who I am, in a non-public way, for a really, really long time. So it felt natural to me. It didn't feel like I was exploring a new medium as such. I was just doing a lot more, and in a very concentrated fashion, of something which I had loved to do for years and years and years.
Yeah, in a similar vein, somebody called Soulful Heart, says interesting concepts and illustrations and great writing. Kudos to both the authors. So both the script as well as the illustrations obviously won the heart of this Soulful Heart. So congratulations. And to end the questions, Vijay Shankar says that the core issue in The Nameless God are the trials and tribulations of children and how events affect tender minds. So, Savie, do you think that we need not try to, and this happens in both books actually, that although these are supposed to be children's books, much bigger events are hinted at. There is hardly any historical event that is not actually figures. It does not figure in the books. Whether it is the violence in Sri Lanka or I think there is an illustration with a physically challenged person in a wheelchair, right? So there is animal, tenderness towards animals in Savie's book. You have kangaroo as one of the important, characters, the dog, right? So, so do you think that if we are able to tell the children in a way in which they can not only enjoy but also appreciate even bigger issues, that there is no need to dumb it down?
Yeah, I don't think we need to dumb down things for children. I guess we underestimate them. And especially when we try to dumb down and talk down to them, I don't think they like it. I guess children like to be treated as equals. So I guess the other way could be make it a little fun or make it as a story in which they can relate to. So that's what I think.
Yeah. And Sharanya, do you think the story in a way conveys to the children the important element that you wanted to convey, both through your words as well as through your illustrations? I particularly, by the way, Sharanya, I wanted to mention, I particularly like the blues and the greens of your illustrations. And something that I don't know if it has any meaning, but I found it very interesting that the book doesn't have page numbers.
Oh, you know what? I just realized that.
Yeah, because I was trying to make a note of, let's say, let me talk about this illustration and note the page number. Then I realized that after all, this is ocean. This is the lagoon. This is water, and this flows from page to page without any interruption of page numbers. So
I think you put a very beautiful poetic spin on an element which just, I think, hadn't occurred to me or hadn't occurred to anyone on the design team. What can I say? But just to add to the earlier question, absolutely, children can see. Children go through things, everything that happens on a societal level. Children are going through those things as well. They're experiencing those things as well. So there is nothing that they don't know. It's just about giving them the resources that help them understand what is happening But in order to do that, first and foremost, we as adults need to have those resources for ourselves. I don't think we do. I don't think we actually engage with or participate in larger discourses, not only political, but even of a civic nature, or in fact of an intimate and personal nature. We don't really engage with what is wrong and how to fix it. But if we do that, I think we'll find it easier to create and to provide resources for children to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And clearly with both of our books here, Savie and I, we have created or tried to create at least these resources that help these conversations happen in the home.
Yeah.
So, with the Nameless God, communalism, recent Indian history, religious coexistence, all of these themes are things which can be discussed in the home through the lens of art. And similarly in my book, as you said, the Civil War, the tsunami, but also many, many minor themes, disability, adoption, abusive relationships, all of which are touched on as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Savie and Sharanya. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for talking to us this evening. And on my own behalf and on behalf of the entire team HLF and our audience, I thank you for this evening.
Absolutely a pleasure.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you.